They stoned a homeless Apache woman in the street, calling her a monster, until a cowboy took her home. Amid this quiet, a lone figure moved slowly, her steps uncertain. She was a woman, her hair tangled and unwashed, her clothes worn thin with age and travel. She carried a small bag slung over her shoulder, packed with the few belongings she had managed to hold on to. Her eyes, though weary and cautious, held a depth of experience that spoke of years spent struggling to survive. She was an Apache woman, a proud descendant of a people with a long and storied history, yet here she was, invisible to most, wandering alone in the streets. At first, people didn't notice her. Some peeked from behind windows, curious but unwilling to step outside. Others hurried past on the sidewalks, pretending not to see her or muttering under their breath. There was a strange tension in the air, a mixture of fear and misunderstanding. This woman did not fit the town's idea of who belonged. Her presence was enough to make some uneasy. It began subtly. A child walking with her mother pointed at the woman and whispered something. The mother pulled the child close, shaking her head. Then a few teenagers, sitting on the steps of a closed storefront, started laughing quietly, whispering mean comments to one another. Soon, more people gathered, drawn not by concern but by curiosity. Rumors started to spread quickly. Some said she was dangerous, others whispered that she was strange, and a few more cruelly muttered words that made her tremble inside. The woman felt it all, though she tried not to show it. Her heart pounded as she tried to find a safe path through the street, moving cautiously past the group that was forming. She kept her head low, hoping to avoid attention, but the whispers followed her like shadows. Then, without warning, one of the teenagers picked up a small stone from the ground and threw it at her. It hit her shoulder lightly, but it was enough to make her stumble. She cried out softly, startled and hurt, and that cry seemed to ignite the crowd. Suddenly, people were shouting at her, calling her names she could barely understand. "Monster!" one voice yelled. Another shouted, "Get out of here!" A few more joined in, throwing small stones in her direction. The woman's instinct was to run, but the street was narrow and the crowd was closing in. Fear took hold, and for a moment she froze, unable to move, her heart racing like a trapped bird. She tried to shield herself with her arms, but the stones kept coming and the words kept hitting harder than the rocks themselves. A few people in the crowd watched silently, some afraid to intervene, others unsure of what to do. A shopkeeper peeked through his window, frowning but saying nothing. Some older residents shook their heads, whispering to themselves that it was sad to see such cruelty, yet their fear of stepping in kept them frozen. The woman could feel their hesitation, and it made her feel even more alone. She remembered stories from her childhood, stories of her ancestors surviving hardships far worse than this, but in that moment it didn't make her feel stronger. It made her feel exposed, vulnerable and invisible, except to the cruelty aimed at her. The sun's heat pressed down on her, making her sweat and causing her muscles to ache from trying to dodge the stones. Her stomach growled with hunger and her throat was dry, but she couldn't stop to eat or drink. The noise of the crowd was overwhelming. Shouts, laughter, and stones clattering on the pavement formed a storm around her. Yet through it all, she kept moving, step by careful step, trying to find an opening, a way out. Every glance from the crowd felt like a dagger, every thrown stone a reminder of how little kindness existed around her. She thought of the desert land she had once roamed with her family, where the wind carried the stories of her people, and the sky stretched endlessly, welcoming and free. But here in this town, the sky felt heavy, oppressive, and the people like shadows that pressed down on her. She realized how dangerous it was to be different, to be alone, and to be visible when others preferred to look away. The fear she felt was not just for her body but for her very being, as if the cruelty of the crowd could erase her from the world. Then, something shifted. In the midst of the chaos, she heard the sound of steady footsteps. A figure was approaching, calm and purposeful, breaking through the whispers and the shouts. It was a man, dressed simply, wearing a hat that shaded his eyes and boots that kicked up small clouds of dust with every step. He moved with confidence, not rushing, not panicking, but with a sense of authority that demanded attention. The crowd instinctively stepped back, unsure why this newcomer didn't join in with their laughter or cruelty. The woman froze, her body trembling, unsure if this man was friend or foe. But there was something in the way he moved, in the calm determination in his eyes, that made her feel a tiny spark of hope. He spoke to the crowd in a firm but quiet voice, asking them to stop. The words carried a weight that silenced the shouts. "Enough," he said simply, and for the first time that day the woman felt a pause, a chance to breathe. The crowd hesitated, uncertain how to react. Some muttered angrily, others shuffled back, and a few left entirely. The woman took advantage of the brief calm, ducking behind a wooden post, trying to collect herself. She could barely believe it. Someone had come not to judge her, not to throw stones, but to protect her. She kept her eyes on the man, watching as he stepped closer, holding out his hand in a gesture that was not threatening but welcoming. When he finally reached her, he knelt down slightly, so he was closer to her level, and spoke in a gentle voice. "Are you all right?" he asked. The woman hesitated, unsure if she could trust anyone after so much hurt. She nodded slightly, her voice caught in her throat. He offered her water from a small canteen and a blanket from over his shoulder. She accepted them cautiously, feeling the warmth and care for the first time that day. As she drank and wrapped herself in the blanket, she realized how alone she had truly been. Not just in this town, but in the world. For a moment, she allowed herself to feel relief, to feel that maybe, just maybe, there were people who would see her as human, not as a monster or a target for cruelty. The man stayed with her, quietly observing the street, ensuring no one came close to harassing her again. His calm presence was a shield, and for the first time in hours the woman felt safe enough to catch her breath. The sun began to lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the street. The sounds of the town returned, but they no longer felt threatening. The woman looked at the man, and for the first time that day, she allowed herself a small smile. She didn't know him, but she felt a connection, a sense that he understood the pain of being judged unfairly, and the relief of finding someone willing to step in when others would not. This moment, simple as it seemed, was the beginning of a change. It was the first step in a journey that would take her from fear to hope, from isolation to trust, and from despair to a sense of belonging. She did not yet know what lay ahead, but for the first time in a long time, she dared to hope that her story might not end on the streets, battered and alone, but somewhere safer, somewhere where her humanity would be recognized and respected. The cowboy watched the woman closely as she wrapped the blanket around her shoulders. She was small, fragile-looking, and yet there was a quiet strength in her eyes, a hint of the resilience that had carried her this far. Her hands trembled slightly, not from cold, but from the shock of what had just happened. The crowd had melted away, leaving only a few curious onlookers peeking from doorways and windows. The street, once alive with noise and cruelty, now felt almost empty, as if the town itself had been holding its breath. The cowboy knelt down a little, trying to make himself less intimidating. "It's all right," he said gently. "You're safe now." The words were simple, but there was a weight to them, a promise that he would not let harm come to her as long as he could prevent it. The woman stared at him, uncertain. Trust was not something she offered easily. Years of being judged, ignored, or ridiculed had built walls around her heart. But there was something different about this man. His calm voice, the careful way he had stepped in to stop the attack, it felt sincere. After a few moments of silence, he added, "I'm not going to hurt you. Come with me. I have a place where you can rest and get something to eat." The woman hesitated. She had been told promises before, only to find betrayal. Yet the kindness in his eyes and the certainty in his voice made her consider it. She slowly nodded, keeping a small distance between them, and followed him as he led her down a quieter side street. The town behind them was still and hot, the sun beating down on the dusty streets. Her steps were cautious, testing the path, always aware of the ground beneath her feet and the people around. She noticed the way the cowboy moved, not hurriedly, not forcefully, but steadily and carefully, as if he knew every step would matter in gaining her trust. She felt a small sense of relief. There was no rush, no loud talk, no demands, only calm guidance, and that was something new to her. As they walked, he asked her a few gentle questions. "Do you have a name?" he inquired. She hesitated before answering, almost whispering, "Ahioka." It was an Apache name she had always carried with pride, but now it felt like something fragile, easily crushed. He repeated it softly, as if tasting the sound, and smiled. "Ahioka, that's a beautiful name, thank you for telling me." That simple acknowledgement felt important, a reminder that she was not invisible. He offered her water from his canteen again. She took it, sipping slowly, grateful for the cool relief it brought. "You must be tired," he said. "Do you have a place to stay tonight?" The question made her pause. She didn't. The last place she had considered home had been too dangerous, and now, after today's attack, the streets were no longer safe. She had nowhere to go, nowhere she could trust, and for the first time in a long while she admitted it, even to herself. I don't," she admitted quietly. The words felt heavy, and for a moment her shoulders slumped as though the weight of her life pressed down on her. The cowboy nodded, not with judgment but with understanding. "Then come with me. You can rest, eat, and be safe. We'll figure out the next steps together." His voice carried patience and reassurance. He didn't push, he didn't demand. He simply offered help, letting her decide at her own pace. The journey to his home was short, but for Ahioka it felt like a significant step. They walked past sun-baked fields, through quiet lanes, and eventually to a small ranch on the outskirts of town. A wooden fence surrounded the property, and a few horses grazed lazily nearby. The house was simple but sturdy, with a warm, welcoming feel. The cowboy opened the door and gestured for her to enter. The smell of fresh bread and herbs greeted her, a comfort she hadn't realized she missed. Inside, the cowboy led her to a small but comfortable room. "You can rest here for now," he said. "I'll give you some food, and then you can relax." There was a gentle kindness in his tone that made her feel safe enough to finally lower her defenses. She sat down carefully on the edge of the bed, still holding her bag close. The warmth of the room and the quiet sense of care slowly eased some of the tension in her body. He left briefly and returned with a plate of simple food, bread, cheese, and some fruit. "Eat something," he encouraged. She hesitated at first, unsure if she could trust anyone to care for her needs without expecting anything in return. But hunger and exhaustion won over caution, and she took the plate, eating slowly. Each bite felt like nourishment for more than just her body. It was a reminder that someone cared enough to provide, to protect, and to listen. As she ate, the cowboy sat across from her, watching quietly. He didn't bombard her with questions or try to fill the silence. He simply allowed her to exist in the space, to feel safe, and to know that someone was there. After a few minutes, he finally spoke again. "I saw what happened out there," he said softly. "People can be cruel when they don't understand, but you are not a monster. You are a person, deserving of respect and kindness." But here was someone telling her the truth, someone reminding her of her humanity. Tears welled up in her eyes, but she blinked them away, afraid to show vulnerability. He noticed, and his expression softened, giving her the space to feel without pushing her further. After a while, she finally spoke, her voice small but steady. I've been alone for so long. People look at me and they see something scary or strange. They don't see me." She paused, unsure if she could continue, then added quietly, "I just want to be safe, even for a little while. And when you are ready, we can figure out how to get you more help if you want it. But right now, the most important thing is that you feel safe and can rest." The sense that someone genuinely cared, without judgment or expectation, was almost overwhelming. She wanted to trust him, but it took effort to push past the fear that had been built over a lifetime. Over the next few hours, Ahioka rested, and the cowboy gave her space, checking in occasionally to ensure she was comfortable and had what she needed. He didn't rush her to talk or share her story. He simply allowed her to exist in a safe, supportive space. Gradually, she began to relax. The tension in her shoulders eased, her breathing slowed, and the tight knot of fear in her chest loosened. As evening fell, the light in the room softened. The shadows of the day, filled with fear and cruelty, seemed to fade just a little. Ahioka realized that, for the first time in a long while, she could breathe without expecting an attack at any moment. She could eat without worry, rest without fear, and exist without judgment. This small sanctuary, created by a man who had appeared at the right moment, was giving her something she had long forgotten: the chance to feel safe, even for a brief time. That night, as she lay on the bed, listening to the quiet sounds of the ranch, the soft breathing of a horse outside, the gentle creak of the wooden floor, the wind rustling the trees, Ahioka allowed herself to imagine a life where she could be safe, respected, and seen. She didn't know what the future held, and she didn't need to. For now, the act of kindness she had received, and the simple presence of someone who cared, was enough. It was a seed of hope planted in the middle of fear, a reminder that humanity could exist even in the harshest moments. The next morning, sunlight poured gently through the windows, casting a warm glow across the small room where Ahioka had spent her first night in safety. The quiet sound of birds chirping outside and the distant lowing of cattle created a peaceful backdrop, far removed from the chaos of the streets she had wandered the day before. She sat up slowly, feeling the unfamiliar comfort of a bed beneath her, and for a moment she simply breathed. The tension that had been her constant companion for months, the fear of stones thrown, of harsh words shouted, of judgment, seemed to loosen slightly. The cowboy appeared at the door holding a tray with a simple breakfast of eggs, bread, and fresh fruit. He smiled gently. "Good morning," he said. "I hope you slept well." Ahioka hesitated, then nodded. She wasn't used to being cared for so unconditionally. Meals had often been uncertain, nights had been long and cold, and kindness had always been scarce. Yet here he was, offering her sustenance without question or expectation. As she ate, he sat across from her, quietly watching, giving her the space to eat without rushing her. Finally, he spoke softly, almost as if inviting her to open a door she had kept shut for too long. "Ahioka, if you want, you can tell me about yourself, but only if you're ready. No pressure." She paused, spoon halfway to her mouth, unsure if she should speak. Talking about herself, her life, and the hardships she had endured was difficult. Trust had been a rare commodity in her life, and now that she had it, she was cautious not to waste it. After a long moment, she finally nodded slightly. I don't know where to start," she admitted. Her voice was quiet, hesitant, but the act of speaking felt like a small victory. "I've lived most of my life moving from place to place. My family, they tried to keep me safe, but things changed. People don't understand what it's like to be Apache in this world. They see the way I look, the way I act, and they assume I am something I am not." She stopped, looking down at her hands folded tightly in her lap. The cowboy listened carefully, his eyes never leaving hers. He didn't interrupt or judge. He simply allowed her to tell her story, to be heard without fear of criticism. "I want to understand," he said quietly. "You don't have to tell me everything, but I'm here to listen." The simple acknowledgement, the promise of a listening ear, encouraged her to continue. "My family was once strong," she said slowly, her voice gaining strength as she remembered. "We lived in the lands our ancestors have cared for generations. There was respect, tradition, stories, and community. But over time, those things disappeared. People came and changed everything. Our lands, our way of life, they were taken away little by little. And then life changed even more for me." Her eyes glistened with unshed tears, and she paused, swallowing hard to keep her voice steady. The cowboy nodded, understanding that her pain was not just from recent events but from years of displacement, misunderstanding, and survival. "That must have been very hard," he said gently. "To lose so much, to have your life changed in ways you couldn't control." She nodded again, grateful that he understood the depth of her struggles without trying to fix them immediately. "Sometimes all a person needed was to be heard. I've had to survive on the streets," she continued. "I've learned to be invisible, to avoid attention, to hide. People hurt each other when they don't understand. and sometimes they hurt even when they do. I've been laughed at, pushed away, ignored, and yesterday they called me a monster and threw stones at me. I've felt that fear before, but never like that. Never with so many people watching and joining in." She paused, a shiver running through her. The cowboy leaned forward slightly, keeping his tone calm and reassuring. "You are not a monster, Ahioka. The people who hurt you are afraid of what they don't understand. But you are strong. You've survived so much already, and that shows courage and resilience." His words were simple, yet they carried weight. She had spent so long hearing negativity that the kind acknowledgement of her strength was almost overwhelming. For the first time in a long while, Ahioka felt a flicker of hope. She realized that her experiences, while painful, had not broken her completely. They had shaped her, given her wisdom, and taught her survival, and now someone was recognizing that truth. Slowly, she allowed herself to relax in the presence of someone who cared without judgment. As the morning moved on, the cowboy suggested a walk outside. "Fresh air can help," he said. "You don't have to talk if you don't want to. Just walk and breathe." Ahioka agreed, and they stepped out into the bright sunlight. The ranch stretched around them, open fields dotted with wildflowers and a few grazing horses. The air smelled sweet with earth and grass, a contrast to the dusty streets she had walked the day before. They walked in silence at first, side by side. There was no rush, no expectation, only the rhythm of steps and the sound of wind through the trees. Slowly, Ahioka began to speak again, sharing small pieces of her life. The town she had passed through, the people who had helped her along the way, the moments of beauty she had found even in hardship. She spoke of the stories her ancestors had told her, stories of courage, wisdom, and the sacred lands they had protected. The cowboy listened, sometimes asking gentle questions to encourage her to elaborate, sometimes simply nodding and allowing the silence to carry its own meaning. He respected her pace, never pushing too far, understanding that trust was delicate and needed time to grow. With each step, Ahioka felt the walls around her heart begin to loosen, replaced with a cautious sense of connection. Eventually, they reached a small stream running through the edge of the property. The water sparkled in the sunlight, clear and inviting. Ahioka knelt at the edge, letting her fingers trail through the cool current. She felt a strange sense of peace, something she hadn't felt in years. The cowboy sat beside her, his presence calm and steady, a reminder that safety could exist even after so much fear. "I used to come to places like this with my family," she said softly, staring at the water. "We would gather by streams, tell stories, sing songs, and feel connected to the land. I haven't felt that connection in a long time." She looked up at him, and for the first time, she allowed herself to hope that such moments could exist again. The cowboy smiled gently. "You can have that again if you want. It won't be easy, and the world may not always be kind, but there are people who care and who want to see you safe and happy. We can take it one step at a time." His words were not promises of perfection, but they were real, tangible hope, something Ahioka had been missing for far too long. They stayed by the stream for a while longer, sharing small stories and listening to the natural sounds around them. The simplicity of the moment, the sunlight, the water, the quiet companionship, was healing. Ahioka felt a growing sense of trust in the cowboy, a realization that kindness could exist without expectation or judgment. For the first time in months, perhaps even years, she allowed herself to imagine a future that was not dominated by fear or loneliness. By the time they returned to the house, the afternoon sun had begun its descent, casting golden light across the fields. Ahioka felt a small but important change within herself. She had shared pieces of her story, been listened to with respect, and experienced genuine kindness. She realized that while the world could be cruel, it could also offer moments of compassion that mattered more than she had allowed herself to believe. As they entered the house, the cowboy spoke again gently. "You've been through so much, Ahioka, and yet you are still here. You are still strong. Remember that even on the hard days, and know that you're not alone anymore." Those words, simple as they were, resonated deeply. She felt a warmth in her chest, a small but persistent flame of hope that perhaps her life could begin to change. That night, as Ahioka settled into bed once again, she reflected on the events of the day. She had shared her story, experienced understanding, and felt a connection to someone who genuinely cared. The walls around her heart, built from years of hardship, were beginning to shift. She didn't know what the future held, but she realized that trust, kindness, and understanding could exist, and perhaps, with patience and courage, her life could start to heal. For the first time in a long time, Ahioka allowed herself to dream, not wildly, not without caution, but quietly, gently, with hope. She imagined a life where she could walk without fear, eat without worry, and rest without anxiety. A life where she could be seen, understood, and valued for who she truly was. And with that small spark of hope, she drifted into a restful sleep, knowing that the journey ahead, while uncertain, had begun on a foundation of care, respect, and trust. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the windows again, warming the small house with a golden glow. Ahioka awoke feeling a little lighter than the day before. The fear and tension that had haunted her for months seemed to have loosened, replaced with a cautious hope that perhaps life could be different. She stretched and took a deep breath, noticing the quiet sounds of the ranch, the soft clucking of chickens, the distant lowing of cows, and the occasional neigh of a horse. For a moment, she simply listened, letting the calm surround her. The cowboy appeared in the doorway holding a tray with breakfast. "Good morning," he said with a smile. "I made some eggs and bread. Eat when you're ready." Ahioka nodded, a small smile forming on her lips. She had eaten with him yesterday, but today felt different. She was beginning to feel a sense of routine, something that had been absent in her life for a long time. For the first time, she didn't have to wonder if food would be available or if the day would be spent running from danger. As she ate, the cowboy suggested they do something outside. "There's work to do around the ranch," he said gently. "Nothing difficult, just chores. It can help pass the time and give you some fresh air. You don't have to, of course, but sometimes keeping busy helps." Ahioka hesitated. She hadn't done physical work in a long time, but the thought of moving, of being useful, felt comforting. She nodded slowly. "Okay," she said softly. Outside, the ranch spread wide under the bright sky. There were fields of grass, a few horses grazing, and a small garden with vegetables and herbs. The cowboy handed her gloves and asked her to help tend the garden. At first, her hands were clumsy in the soil. She hadn't worked with her hands like this in years, but the cowboy was patient, showing her how to plant seeds, pull weeds, and care for the plants. Slowly, she began to enjoy it. The feel of the earth, the smell of fresh soil, and the sense of contributing to something tangible lifted her spirits. While they worked, the cowboy spoke gently. "You don't have to tell me anything more about your past if you're not ready," he said. "But if you ever want to share, I'm here to listen. You've already told me so much, and that was brave." Ahioka nodded, grateful for his patience. She realized she could trust him, that he wasn't expecting anything from her. He simply offered guidance and support. That was new to her, and it felt safe. By late morning, they had finished tending the garden, and the cowboy suggested a break. They sat on the porch, drinking water and watching the horses. The sun was warm, but a gentle breeze made it pleasant. Ahioka felt a sense of peace she hadn't known in years. She realized that she could breathe without fear, that she could exist in a world that didn't demand she hide herself. The simple act of being outside, helping, and resting made her feel grounded, like she had roots again. After a short rest, the cowboy suggested they work on the horses. "They need brushing and feeding," he said. "It's simple, but it can be relaxing. Horses are very sensitive. They respond to kindness and patience. It's a good way to practice being calm and gentle with yourself too." Ahioka agreed, and they walked to the stables. The smell of hay and animals was comforting. The cowboy showed her how to brush the horses' coats and check their hooves. At first she was nervous, but the animals were gentle and their quiet presence soothed her. She felt a connection she hadn't realized she was missing, the simple understanding that kindness creates trust. Throughout the day, Ahioka began to notice changes in herself. She felt her body move more freely, her hands work confidently, and her mind focus on small tasks instead of fear. The cowboy praised her efforts, not with exaggeration but with genuine acknowledgement. "You're doing well," he said simply. "See what you can accomplish with patience and care." Those words struck her deeply. For so long she had been told she was invisible or unworthy. Now someone was recognizing her effort, her care, her abilities. Later in the afternoon, the cowboy suggested they prepare a meal together. Ahioka hesitated, unsure if she could help, but he encouraged her gently. In the kitchen, he showed her how to chop vegetables and mix ingredients. At first, she was careful, watching every movement, afraid of making a mistake. But the cowboy remained patient, showing her that mistakes were part of learning. Slowly she relaxed, and the act of cooking together became a small joy. She laughed quietly when a vegetable rolled off the counter, and he laughed with her, making the moment light and human. As they ate the meal together, Ahioka realized she had not shared a table with someone in such a normal, calm way for years. There was no fear, no judgment, no expectation beyond enjoying the moment. She felt the warmth of companionship, something that had been missing in her life for far too long. The simple act of sharing food, helping each other, and sitting together created a sense of belonging she had almost forgotten existed. After dinner, the cowboy suggested a quiet evening. "We can sit outside, watch the stars," he said. "No talking is necessary if you don't want." "Sometimes it's nice just to watch and listen," Ahioka agreed. They stepped outside, the night sky stretching endlessly above them, stars shining brightly in the clear air. The quiet of the night combined with the beauty of the stars made her feel small but also connected to the world, to nature, and to something larger than herself. As they sat together, the cowboy spoke softly. "You've been through so much, Ahioka, but you're not alone anymore. It doesn't mean everything will be perfect, but it means you have someone to help you, someone who cares. That matters." Ahioka nodded, her eyes reflecting the starlight. The words felt true, and for the first time in a long time, she felt that it might be possible to start rebuilding her life piece by piece. Over the next few days, Ahioka continued to settle into the rhythm of life at the ranch. She helped with the garden, the animals, and small household tasks. Each task, though simple, brought a sense of accomplishment and purpose. She discovered that even small contributions mattered and that she could be valued for her efforts. The cowboy never rushed her, never demanded more than she could give, and never judged her for her past. His patience allowed her to heal slowly, naturally, and with dignity. One afternoon, as they worked together in the garden, Ahioka spoke quietly. "I've never had a place like this before," she admitted. "A place where I can rest and work and feel safe. It's strange but good." "I didn't think something like this was possible for me," the cowboy smiled. "It is possible, and it's not just about this place. It's about the people who care and the choices you make to keep trusting. You've already taken the hardest step, letting someone in." It was learning to trust, to believe that someone could care for her without expecting anything in return. And now she had taken that step. Slowly, she began to imagine what life could be like beyond mere survival, what it could mean to have hope, safety, and the possibility of connection. Evenings at the ranch became a time for quiet reflection. Ahioka would sit on the porch, watch the sun set over the fields, and breathe deeply. She felt her strength returning, her heart opening, and her mind becoming clearer. She thought about her ancestors, about the stories she had been told, and about the resilience they had passed down. She realized that their strength lived within her, and now, for the first time in years, she felt it flowing again. The cowboy continued to support her, offering guidance, sharing tasks, and simply being present. He never pressured her to talk more than she wanted or to do more than she could handle. His presence was steady, reliable, and reassuring. Over time, Ahioka began to trust not just him but the possibility of a life where safety, kindness, and dignity could exist together. By the end of the week, Ahioka felt a sense of belonging she hadn't known in a long time. She was still cautious, aware of the world's dangers, but she also felt empowered. She could contribute, she could rest, and she could imagine a future that was brighter than the streets she had wandered. The cowboy had provided more than shelter. He had given her the opportunity to reclaim her sense of self, to trust again, and to heal. As she lay in bed that night, listening to the gentle sounds of the ranch, the horses breathing, the wind rustling the trees, Ahioka felt something she hadn't felt in years: hope. Not blind or naive, but steady, quiet, and persistent. She realized that her journey was far from over, but she now had the strength, the support, and the courage to continue it. For the first time in a long time, she slept peacefully, knowing that she was not alone, that she was seen, and that she had the chance to begin again. The days at the ranch passed steadily, each one bringing new rhythms and small victories. Ahioka had begun to settle into a life she had never thought possible, a life where safety, care, and kindness were not fleeting, but real and present. She woke each morning with a sense of purpose, helping with the chores, tending the garden, feeding the animals, and learning the routines of ranch life. The work was simple, yet it gave her a sense of accomplishment she had not felt in years. Each task completed, no matter how small, was a reminder that she could contribute, that she mattered, and that she was capable. The cowboy, patient as ever, guided her through the work without ever demanding more than she could give. He offered support and instruction, but never criticism or judgment. He allowed her to take her time, to learn at her own pace, and to rebuild her confidence. Slowly, Ahioka began to feel the strength returning to her body and mind. She realized that survival on the streets had honed her resilience, but this new life was teaching her how to live again, with calm, patience, and hope. One afternoon, after a morning of chores, the cowboy suggested they take a walk outside the ranch, beyond the familiar fields and pastures. "There's a small trail leading to a hill with a great view," he said. "It's quiet up there and you can see the whole valley. Sometimes it helps to see the bigger picture, to remind yourself of what's possible." Ahioka agreed, curious and eager for a change of scenery. The trail was narrow and winding, lined with wildflowers and grasses swaying in the breeze. As they walked, the cowboy asked gentle questions about her dreams and hopes. "If you could imagine your life in a year," he said, "what would it look like?" The question made Ahioka pause. She had never allowed herself to imagine the future, not really. Her life had been about surviving, about keeping safe, about hiding. But now she felt the first sparks of possibility. I would like to feel safe," she said slowly. "To have a place where I belong, where people don't judge me for who I am. I would like to have friends, maybe even help others who are struggling like I was." Her voice gained confidence as she spoke. "I want to be part of something, to contribute, to matter." The cowboy nodded, listening carefully, his eyes reflecting understanding and encouragement. "Those are all possible, Ahioka. It will take time, but you have the strength and courage to make them real." The cowboy stood beside her quietly, allowing her the space to absorb the beauty and the sense of possibility. "I've never seen anything like this," Ahioka whispered, her eyes wide. "It feels peaceful, like maybe life could be different." The cowboy smiled. "It can be, if you continue to believe and take steps forward. The world can be harsh, yes, but it can also be full of moments like this, moments of beauty, connection, and hope. You deserve them just as much as anyone." She realized that she had begun to reclaim her life, not just physically, by having food, shelter, and rest, but emotionally and spiritually. She had learned to trust, to hope, and to see the possibilities beyond fear and cruelty. The cowboy had shown her that someone could care without expectation, that kindness could be consistent, and that healing, though slow, was real. Returning to the ranch, Ahioka continued her work with renewed energy and confidence. She took pride in her contributions, whether it was preparing a meal, caring for the horses, or tending the garden. Each act, no matter how small, reminded her that she had worth, that her efforts mattered, and that she could be a force of good in her own life. The cowboy encouraged her at every step, celebrating her achievements and helping her recognize the progress she was making. As the days turned into weeks, Ahioka began to interact more with the world beyond the ranch. With the cowboys' support, she ventured into the nearby town for small errands, buying supplies, visiting the local market, and speaking with people in a cautious but polite manner. At first, it was intimidating. The memories of stones thrown and harsh words shouted were still fresh, but each trip gave her confidence. She began to realize that not everyone was cruel, that there were people capable of kindness, and that she could navigate the world without fear overwhelming her. One afternoon, as they returned from town, the cowboy asked her how she felt. "Stronger," she said after a pause, "more capable. I see that I can survive not just the streets but life itself, and I'm starting to believe that I can be more than just a survivor. I can be part of something, I can help and maybe even inspire others." The cowboy nodded, pride and warmth in his eyes. "You're right, Ahioka, and your journey, your story can be a guide for others who feel lost. You've already shown courage, and that courage can be shared." She realized that her experiences, though painful, had prepared her for a life of empathy, understanding, and courage. She could use her story to help others who struggled with fear, isolation, or prejudice. One night, as they sat on the porch watching the stars, Ahioka spoke softly. "I never thought I would see a life like this for myself," she admitted. "I thought I was doomed to be invisible, to be alone, to wander forever. But now I feel like there's a future. I can breathe, I can hope, I can belong." The cowboy smiled gently, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "And you do belong, Ahioka. You belong here and you belong in the world. You've earned this chance, and you've worked hard for it." The cowboy continued to guide her, but he also gave her the freedom to make choices, to explore her strengths, and to shape her own future. Slowly but surely, she began to believe that she could live a life filled with dignity, purpose, and connection. Ahioka also began to reflect on her own past and her ancestors. She remembered the stories of courage, resilience, and survival, and realized that those lessons were not just history, they were alive within her. She could carry them forward, using her strength to navigate challenges and to support others who might be struggling. The cowboy's guidance had given her the practical tools, but her own inner strength gave her the vision for what her life could become. By the end of her first few months at the ranch, Ahioka had transformed in ways she had never thought possible. She had moved from fear to trust, from isolation to connection, and from survival to hope. She had regained her sense of self, learned to navigate the world with confidence, and discovered that kindness, patience, and empathy could change lives. The cowboy had provided more than shelter. He had given her a foundation for rebuilding her life, a space to heal, and the courage to dream again. One evening, as the sun set in brilliant colors over the horizon, Ahioka stood on the porch, looking out at the fields and the distant town. She felt a sense of peace and clarity she had never known. The memories of stones thrown, cruel words shouted, and the fear of being alone were still there, but they no longer controlled her. She had survived, yes, but now she was thriving. She was capable, strong, and ready to face the world on her own terms. Turning to the cowboy, she smiled. "Thank you," she said simply, "for everything, for seeing me, for trusting me, for helping me believe that life can be good again." He smiled back, a quiet warmth in his eyes. "You did all the hard work yourself, Ahioka. I just walked beside you. Your courage brought you here, and it will carry you forward." She knew that life would have challenges ahead, but she also knew that she had the strength, resilience, and support to face them. As the stars began to appear in the sky, Ahioka felt a quiet joy in her heart. She had survived the streets, endured fear and cruelty, and faced the pain of being invisible. But now she had hope, safety, and a sense of belonging. She had learned that trust could be rebuilt, that kindness could be real, and that life, even after hardship, could be beautiful. She closed her eyes, breathed in the cool night air, and allowed herself to dream once more, knowing that the path ahead was hers to shape, and that she was ready.